In the summer of 1914, the Gilded Age of progress and optimism came to a violent end. Europe, a continent brimming with imperial pride, was a powder keg of simmering hatreds. A complex web of military alliances, a frantic and expensive arms race, and the burning ambitions of nationalism had turned it into a tinderbox. All it needed was a single fatal spark. That spark was about to be lit in a city few had heard of, igniting a global fire that would consume an entire generation and redraw the map of the world. They called it the Great War, and later, the War to End All Wars. It was a conflict of unprecedented scale and unimaginable brutality, where old world cavalry charges met the industrial efficiency of the machine gun. It was a war of empires, but one that would be decided by the terrifying new technologies of the 20th century. And watching from across the ocean, a rising industrial power, the United States, clung to a fragile and increasingly difficult neutrality. If you want to charge into the trenches of history and come out with an A-grade victory, make sure to enlist with our channel by hitting that like button and subscribing. Now fall in, because we're going over the top. The causes of World War I are often remembered by the acronym MAIN. First, M, for militarism. The great powers were locked in a massive arms race. Germany was building a huge modern army, and its naval expansion, led by Admiral Tirpitz, directly challenged Great Britain's long-held mastery of the seas. This led to a costly competition to build bigger, faster, and more powerful battleships, the famous dreadnoughts. A stood for alliances. A tangled web of secret treaties divided Europe into two armed camps, turning a regional dispute into a continent-wide war. On one side were the Central Powers, dominated by the German Empire and the multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian Empire. On the other side were the Allied powers, principally the alliance of France, the Russian Empire, and Great Britain. I, for imperialism, meant constant friction. The scramble for Africa and competition for resources and markets around the globe created rivalries and resentments. And finally, N, for nationalism. Intense, often aggressive pride in one's homeland fueled the fire. This was especially true in the Balkans, the powder keg of Europe, where Slavic peoples, encouraged by Russia, sought to break free from Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman rule. The spark came on June 28, 1914. In Sarajevo, Bosnia, a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip, a member of the secret society known as the Black Hand, assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Austria-Hungary, with a blank check of support from Germany, issued an impossible ultimatum to Serbia. When Serbia refused, the dominoes began to fall. The complex web of alliances was triggered, and by August, all of Europe was at war. Germany's leader, the arrogant and impetuous Kaiser Wilhelm II, was certain of a quick, glorious victory based on his army's Schlieffen Plan, a lightning strike through Belgium to knock out France before Russia could mobilize. He famously promised his departing troops,
"You will be home before the leaves have fallen from the trees."
As Europe descended into the bloody, grinding stalemate of trench warfare, America wanted no part of it. President Woodrow Wilson, a man of deep moral conviction, declared a policy of strict neutrality, echoing the long-held American tradition of avoiding foreign entanglements. He urged the American people to remain impartial.
The United States must be neutral in fact as well as in name. We must be impartial in thought as well as in action.
For 3 years, America walked a tightrope. Neutrality was complicated by deep economic ties to the Allies. American banks, like J.P. Morgan, had loaned the Allied powers over $2 billion. A German victory would put those loans at risk. The nation was also deeply divided, with millions of recent German and Irish immigrants sympathizing with the Central Powers, while most of the country felt a cultural connection to Britain and France. In 1916, Wilson won a narrow re-election with a powerful slogan: "He kept us out of war." But staying neutral became increasingly difficult. The powerful British Navy had blockaded Germany, cutting off essential supplies. In response, Germany unleashed a devastating new terror weapon, the U-boat, or submarine. They declared a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare in the waters around Great Britain, aiming to starve the island nation into submission before the United States could ever mobilize an army. On May 7, 1915, a German U-boat torpedoed the British passenger liner Lusitania. Over 1,200 people died, including 128 Americans. Germany pointed out that it had placed warnings in American newspapers against traveling on the ship and that it was carrying munitions. But the act of sinking a passenger ship without warning outraged the American public and pushed the nation much closer to war. The final straw came in January 1917. British intelligence intercepted and decoded a secret diplomatic message from the German Foreign Minister, Arthur Zimmermann, to the German ambassador in Mexico. It was the Zimmermann telegram. The telegram was stunning. It proposed a secret military alliance between Germany and Mexico if the United States entered the war against Germany. In return for its assistance, Germany would help Mexico reconquer the lost territory of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Published in American newspapers, the telegram was a direct threat to American soil. The news was explosive and turned public opinion decisively against Germany. The resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare in February, combined with the outrage over the Zimmermann telegram, was too much. On the rainy evening of April 2, 1917, President Wilson, the man who had kept us out of war, went before Congress and asked for a declaration of war. He framed the conflict not as a fight for territory, but as a moral crusade.
The world must be made safe for democracy. Its peace must be planted upon the tested foundations of political liberty. We are but one of the champions of the rights of mankind.
America was now in the war, but it was far from prepared. The Selective Service Act was passed, instituting a massive draft. Millions of young American men, nicknamed Doughboys, were hastily trained and shipped over there. They were placed under the command of the tough, no-nonsense General John J. Blackjack Pershing. Pershing was adamant that the American Expeditionary Forces, or AEF, would fight as an independent army. He rejected British and French demands to use American soldiers as mere replacements or fill-ins for their own battered units. Pershing understood that if America was to have a major voice in the peace negotiations after the war, its army needed to win its own victories under its own flag.
The American flag must be carried on the battle line! I will not permit it to be hidden!
The Doughboys were thrown into the horrifying crucible of modern industrial warfare. They faced the brutal reality of trench warfare, charging across the hellish no-man's land into a hail of machine gun fire, enduring terrifying artillery barrages, and choking on clouds of poison gas. They also faced new mechanical monsters, the first armored tanks, which terrified defenders as they crushed barbed wire and crawled over trenches. The AEF's most significant and defining moment came in the fall of 1918. The Meuse-Argonne offensive was a massive assault that lasted over a month. It was the largest and deadliest battle in American history up to that point, with over 26,000 American soldiers killed. But the courage of the Doughboys, including heroes like Medal of Honor recipient Alvin York, helped shatter the German lines and bring the war to an end. Back home, the entire country mobilized for war under agencies like the War Industries Board. An army of propagandists urged citizens to buy Liberty bonds to finance the war, while the Food Administration, led by future President Herbert Hoover, encouraged people to observe meatless Mondays and plant victory gardens to conserve food for the troops. This wave of patriotism had a dark side. Anti-German hysteria swept the country. The Espionage and Sedition Acts were passed, making it a crime to criticize the government or the war effort. These laws, upheld by the Supreme Court in Schenck versus the United States, under the clear and present danger doctrine, led to the arrest of over 6,000 dissenters, including socialist leader Eugene Debs, and represented a major challenge to free speech. Finally, with its armies broken and its people starving, Germany agreed to an armistice. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the guns on the Western Front fell silent. The Great War was over. President Wilson traveled to the Paris Peace Conference with a grand vision for a lasting, non-punitive peace. He outlined this vision in his 14 points, which called for an end to secret treaties, freedom of the seas, and, most importantly, the creation of a League of Nations, an international body where nations could work out their problems without resorting to war. But the other Allied leaders, particularly Georges Clemenceau of France, had no interest in a peace without victory. They wanted revenge. They wanted to punish Germany and ensure it could never threaten Europe again. The final Treaty of Versailles was harsh. It forced Germany to accept full blame for the war in a war guilt clause and to pay billions in crippling reparations. Wilson's dream faced its biggest opposition back home. The Senate, led by the powerful Republican Henry Cabot Lodge, feared that Article 10 of the League of Nations Charter would entangle the United States in future European conflicts, stripping Congress of its constitutional power to declare war.
The United States is the world's best hope, but if you fetter her in the interests and quarrels of other nations, you will destroy her power for good and endanger her very existence.
To rally support, the ailing President Wilson undertook an exhausting nationwide speaking tour, but he suffered a debilitating stroke. The Senate ultimately rejected the Treaty of Versailles. The United States, the nation whose president had conceived of the League of Nations, would never join it. America had gone to war to make the world safe for democracy. It had succeeded, but at a great cost. It emerged from the conflict as the world's preeminent economic and military power, but the brutal experience left the country wounded, disillusioned with European politics, and determined to retreat from the world stage. The war to end all wars had tragically failed to create a lasting peace. The harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles would humiliate Germany and cripple its economy, planting the bitter seeds of resentment that would blossom into an even more devastating global conflict just 20 years later. The world had been changed forever, but not for the better. Next time, we'll leave the battlefields of Europe behind and dive into the wild, chaotic, and revolutionary decade that followed, the Roaring Twenties. You won't want to miss the parties, the progress, and the problems of a new modern age. Thanks for watching. To make sure you don't go missing in action for our next episode, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Until next time, stay curious.